Everyone, today we're going to jump back into all the different Jarl lists. So over the past couple weeks, coming up into the release of the hero, we have covered a lot of different versions of the deck. Now, of course, after all this time, we have to ask, has anything changed, and are we kind of leaning towards one style of list over the other? Unfortunately, to cut it short, I'm not really sure, because MST has created a bunch of unique problems to the hero, where it seems like every list kind of starts to tap into winning one of the matchups between the three different heroes, whether that's Zen, New, or Enigma, and then somehow fell short in the other two. So you're kind of in a weird spot where none of them really feel competitively viable because of the existence of that set, but as some of them maybe get to rotate out in the next couple months during the RTN or the ProQuest season, hopefully fingers crossed, then we can start actually really starting to refine into one style of list. But we're going to go through what we've been working with the past few weeks and kind of recap, as well as give some current thoughts and then also some quick tweaks. Let's start with the list I ran at my local 1K. So we went pretty bad. We went 1-3 on it. We lost to New, we lost to Zen, and then we also lost the Mirror because they were on CYB. And this was a more aggro ice list. This was mostly here to prey on like Aurora and other, low to the ground aggro decks. I was kind of expecting some Dio, and they were there. We just didn't hit any of it, unfortunately. This list felt very good for what it wanted to do. And I think based on how the game with Zen went, as well as New, there was a couple margins where I made a mistake, and then also some variants punished me really hard or favored my opponent extremely well. I think that with a little bit better luck, there's a very reasonable chance that we actually could have flipped the tables with a few of those games, and then potentially made it into top 8 with the 1K. So this list felt like it had game. The biggest thing though is I was still running Mangle. I just cut this right now for disable. I ended up cutting the block card because the block card meant that you converted really poorly. If your opponent passes back to you after you're done, playing your Ice Quake on your Frostfang or pummeling it, and they have nothing to do and they pass back and you draw like the block card or whatever, it feels really bad. And I think that the road to making a better Jarl deck will probably involve cutting the block card and then eventually Mangle entirely. Both those cards feel very weak. Your opponent is going to break their equipment anyway with Jarl's ability. They are too situational based on the game state. If you draw Mangle, like on going second and your opponent has no -1 counters on their equipment, you're going to wish you had something like Disable, like an actual relevant crush effect to your opponent. And the block card, if you draw it after all their equipment is gone and it does nothing, or, early on and they don't have a -1 counter, all it feels so circumstantial. And even when you get the payoff, it's not really even that impressive. If it was like a game-winning payoff to somehow time together going Crumble into the block card, into Mangle, and it just said on hit win the game, then we can consider playing something like that, but it doesn't. And it really felt pretty inconsistent. Even at the tournament, I cast Mangle like maybe twice. I blocked it pretty much every other time, or I pitched it hoping that when I redrew it, it would be relevant, and it never was. I think that you eventually have to cut the card, and this list feels pretty good for what it wanted to do. Smack of Reality could maybe be something else, maybe extra copies of Snag, or these 3 cards could be a different tech card, but for what I needed during the day, this felt like the right call. Of course, if I could go back in time and add Disable, maybe my odds get a little bit better, and I think that's Summit needs to be Titan's Fist. So I'll actually go and make that change now. It may seem weird because you're going to be sending it for 3 a lot of the times, but trust me, having 1 card left over and sending 3 is better than having 2 cards and sending 4, if that makes sense. Almost every time I wanted to send Summit, it felt terrible and it felt like the worst thing I could be doing during the turn. And I think that it's just better, to have a card like Titan's Fist, especially considering how bad Summit is. So that was the other realization I had, was that Summit is just a really terrible card. The fact that they overcorrected so hard on it is really baffling to me. I didn't feel like it would have been oppressive to have the Frostbite be unconditional. There's a lot of weird problems that come up in this deck with Summit. Because Summit gives the Frostbite in an exposed zone, if you go like Ice Quake into Summit and they only have 1 exposed slot available, the Summit does basically nothing. I think it would have been perfectly fine to give the Frostbite just in the general zone, or unconditionally. Like if I'm going to pay 6 resources to send 4 damage, like just put the Frostbite on the on hit. I don't know why it needs to also have this condition. It feels completely unnecessary. So with that being said, while most of the time we're not going to be able to actually send Titan's Fist for 4, we will have some hands where we will get to do it. And I think that's probably good enough. We're never really sending Titan's Fist all the time in this list anyway. If you have to block out with everything, you might just want to play a Winner's Bite and pass, or arsenal something like a Pummel or an Ice Quake. And then if you are attacking your opponent during your turn, you have much better things to do anyway. So this is so marginal, and you're only going to play this in the matchups where you really want Stalags. That's like Aurora or Dio, and like it's so minute here. For some of these games, like especially in a Dio, you're normally winning via fatigue anyway, to some degree, whether that's like sending disruption, having her run out of cards because she can't really like play everything through all the frostbites, and she boosts without getting enough cards played in a turn. It doesn't matter, right? Titan's Fist is so marginal, but every once in a while when you want to send, Terra Sunder, when your opponent passes back, who cares if it's Summit or Titan's Fist? This is so marginal, and you probably can still choose to include Summit if you want. So this list felt pretty cool, especially now that we're cutting Mangle, so we can move on from that. Let's go back to the original list that first kicked off Jarl for the channel. That was the Barkskin list. Barkskin is the version of the deck I wish was playable, and unfortunately, I don't know how it'll ever exist until like all of MST rotates. All the MST heroes play the mid-range game plan, and the attrition-based game plan so much better than you. If you're not playing some like degenerate form of like a CYB hardcore fatigue deck, if you're just playing like good numbers and hoping that a lean 60 with good rates is going to get you there, a spoiler alert, it's not. Maybe this deck would absolutely wreck the heavy hitters format. I think that's probably why I built it with that in mind, is this longing, I suppose, for that kind of game plan. Like if we're playing this in like the MST meta, there's no reason to ever do it, I think, upon further reflection. But during like a heavy hitters meta where we were playing like Axe Story, Kasai, KO, and Victor, of course this makes no sense. I'm inserting a hero in a time period where it was intentionally not released. But all I'm saying is that this style list is very cool, but it's just not currently where the game is at. I don't think it's probably what you want to be doing. If I were to go back and retweak any of this, I added Blue Fruits in. I think Blue Fruits is just a really strong blue to include. That's so marginal. But I would maybe once again try to find something to replace the Mangle and the Unforgettings. I think that maybe there can be more room for these cards in this list because it's more of a mid-range based game plan. And you're slowing the game down enough that you're going to get the opportunity in the window to get like good value out of these. And if that's the main game plan, then maybe it's okay. But you also could take this list and maybe consider adding in some better disruption cards, whether that's, like a Frostfang. These two Unforgettings could easily be Frostfangs, and you have additional disruption to send at your opponent. It could be Pummels as well, although Pummel without the Summit is a really big feels bad. But let's go ahead and let's actually, on the fly, let's just make the right call and let's just take it out. Let's put in Titan's Fist. We have a good decent amount of 3 blocks or 3 costs here. We could even think about cutting Winter's Grasp to get even better equity into new. So let's actually just go ahead and make that change now. So let's go ahead and find something. Okay, we have some stuff. We could play Buckle. I mean, like Buckle is like totally fine. We have to think about cards that like new can't play against us, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and cut the Winter's Grasp. And then let's think. We could play Embolden. Bolden's like totally reasonable. Is there anything else better? I mean, we could play like an Insidious Chill if we want, although that's like pretty meh to me. I kind of want like a good, I'm feeling Buckle. I think Buckle could be cool. There's no way that they can play Guardian Attack against us. I want to double check that before we put it in. And then let's go ahead, and because we're on Titan's Fist, that now means we get to do a couple things. We get to play Pummel once again, right? Kind of similar philosophy. We decided we wanted to play Summit, which meant that we didn't want to play Pummel. The main problem now is that now you have to consider if you want to play Tunic or not. But we do have Tunic down the sideboard regardless, so maybe it doesn't matter. But now we can add in Pummel, and I think the way we're going to want to split this is we're probably going to want to go like 2 red Pummels, and then we're probably going to want to cut the Mangle, probably for something else. We have a couple different options. We could, of course, look at something like Weakest Link. I think that's probably perfectly reasonable, although I think our Weakest Links are going to go down in our sideboard. We're going to cut out Summer's Fall because there was no point in ever, coping like we were going to be able to ever do anything into Enigma. So let's go ahead and let's add Weakest Link in the sideboard. I'm so sorry if you don't own these. The price is about to go through the roof. Now we need to think about 3 red cards we could add. I kind of like the idea of just mixing a bit more ice in here. Like we can add Frostfang, like it's a good card. We could add in Icequake. That's also a good card. Although my only concern is that with Frostfang and, with Icequake and Pummel, we're now like running up the risk of bricking a little bit more. So I kind of like the idea of maybe just adding like a good 3 block. We could even think about that, because maybe it's completely unnecessary. So I mean, like Disable definitely fits the bill for what we want. Is there anything else we could do? Like we could do like Red Glacial. Like Red Glacial is like a good finisher. We probably want a little bit more disruption, I think. I think Red Glacial is pretty sweet, but we probably want something that maybe stops our opponent from winning the game. So let's think a little bit more about what we could add. Honestly, I think that what we probably want here, to be perfectly honest, is probably just E-Strike. It's a bit boring, but we'll throw Frostfang in the maybe board if people want to consider playing it. So it could be 3 copies of Frostfang, or maybe a Disable, something like that. Let's go down here. Wow, there's actually a big maybe board down here. I think we're gonna cut the choke slams. I think we're gonna cut this. We're gonna cut these. The only difference here though is I actually want to move crown up, because with pummel, sometimes it's a bit awkward if you draw 2 pummels and you really need to clear one, or you draw a pummel and you just need a blue to play it on your CNC or whatever, and then all of a sudden you kind of want to have a different card available. So I think we'll run it like that. We're gonna cut cranial. There's like no reason to ever consider these blues until new rotates. Does hypo deserve a spot on the list? It could. Maybe it would be in the slot of like Winter's Bite or something. I'll let you, the viewer, make that call for yourself. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Barkskin list. This maybe will function a little bit better. I'm a bit sad having E-Strike. I'll maybe think about some better cards to get run in that slot. Moving on, we have the super aggressive Anothos style list. The thing we added was Cut Through the Facade. I think it's just going to clean up the match a lot better. That's basically it. There's not really anything else going on here. The only thing I may consider cutting is I think I want to go include, I think I want to include the red glacials and cut the red machos. I think there's a lot of circumstances where we're gonna have the ability to fuse maybe, and we just want to play the red glacial, or we want to play it raw for 10 damage and we don't really care about the dominate. If we do care about the dominate, it's going to be in the late stages of the game where we're going to be able to fuse it regardless. And just having it be for 6 is just kind of nice, but maybe it's entirely pointless. Maybe we don't really care. I think what we really should do instead actually is just cut the mangle. It's a sad day, but you know, here we are. Maybe designing an entire hero around a bad majestic was not the best call. It means that your gauntlets could be whatever you want them to be from now on, but you know, here we are. And so this was the list. I was very aggressive, like we're trying to play a bunch of go again cards into Anothos every turn. So that was things like Rouse, you know, Outmuscle, Zealous, and then we have things like Plume to recycle Summer's Fall. Although I think that honestly, looking at this list again, I think there is a mistake here. I think we gotta include the blue Summer's Fall as well. This seems so, I don't know, overkill, but I think we just need like a little bit more going on here. And it could be in the place of the Rouse or possibly the Terra Center, although I love the Terra Center specifically with the Anothos. So maybe not. Let me think about this for like a quick second, just looking at this list here. It could take the place of like the Pulse or the Crumbles, and yeah, those may be entirely pointless, especially now that we've cut, you know, Mangle. So like the only thing we're going to do with it is we're going to fuse it to Oaken or to like Glacial or something, but being able to fuse Oaken is so important. So maybe it's worth it. Maybe this is overkill. Let's just go back to the regular copies. And this is probably like good enough to catch some Enigmas off guard, although this list feels like completely hopeless into the 10k versions of the list, which is very odd, because like as soon as they do that, the deck can't win, and then you kind of wonder why you built an entire deck to beat Enigma that can't beat Enigma. On the flip side, this probably beats like stacking Viscerais like super comfortably if you include something like a Smack of Reality. So I'll go ahead and I'll add that in the maybe board. If you want to, you know, tech this thing out to beat Viscerai, this would be the card you would include. You cut things like Vambrace and Plume if you want to care less about the Enigma matchup. But this being able to pummel it just means that like they just can't stack against you, along with things like Cut, like being able to kill Malefics, and just having a bunch of dominate. Like they're not going to be able to do anything. They're not going to be able to stack long enough to live. So that was the Anothos. I mean, this feels more like a Victor style list, like a Victor cosplay. And then finally, we've hit the Fatigue style list. The Fatigue style list, like just want to play like a 70 card pile into a bunch of heroes, and then any sideboarding you would really do would basically come in the form of your equipment. Or into some matchups, if you want, you could cut some cards and go down to a lean 60. If you're, you know, maybe playing against something like Dash.io and you kind of worry more about having access to all of the best cards in your Dash.io matchups, so maybe you want to cut the CYBs because they feel less impactful, and because you don't want the risk of having the non-blocks in your hand, then maybe you go down to 64 and just have like all lean blocking cards. Maybe you cut the Oasis as well and go down to 63. But that's like this list. Now, oddly enough, I think it's probably fine to play the pile and play like the Mangles and the Unforgettings, maybe. But even looking at this now, I just on the topic of today, I kind of want to cut them all again. This may be like way overkill because you'll definitely have the space to resolve these, and having access to 10 dominate in a fatigue list can be pretty good. However, I can't just help but look at this and just think about the fact that these could be better disruption in the form of different 3 blocks. So let's go ahead and see what we could play instead. Off the top of my head, we could play things like Spinal, and we could play, you know, Disable. These are perfectly good punishes when you're playing a fatigue deck, right? Because I mean, these cards are going to block 3 anyway. But the main difference is that if you play these cards, and it really punishes your opponent who took a bit of an off turn to set up into you, rather than playing something like Mangle or getting stuck with something like Unforgiving. So if we were to do that, access to 2 different red cards we could play. These probably could be like weakest links. They probably will end up being weakest link, to be honest, but let's go ahead and see if there's anything else. I think they probably, actually, now that I just saw it now, they should just be CNC. So we could go like 3 copies of CNC, maybe like 2 copies of weakest link, just until the MST heroes leave. And then we could consider replacing these maybe with something like Spinal, or, you know, maybe like Disable, something like that. Although, now that I'm looking at this even more, I want to go up to 3 copies of this and maybe remove the 1 copy of the Staunch. I think sometimes drawing 2 Staunches in the same hand is a little bit too game losing. And I think that this is probably fine as is. I kind of like how this looks, to be honest. You have a good amount of disruption if your opponent ever takes off turns, but these are still 3 blocks. And you don't really care about losing the Unforgetting or the Mangle, and your deck probably is just better off for it. You still have access to Righteous Cleansing, of course, to beat the MST heroes and pitch stack to counter their Cosmic Awakenings, or specifically just into any deck you're fatiguing when they take too slow of an off turn. You present a weird fork for them where if they block this thing out entirely, they lose like 3 cards from deck, but if they let it hit, they probably lose a power card, so they always have to respect the on hit, and then you just take cards from them either way, which is a pretty nice thing to have. And I mean, this is like such a self-explanatory list. So we still have the 1 copy of Hypo. Maybe you can swap it around with the copy of Summer's Fall down here if you want a little bit more access to disrupting Aurora or Dash.io. And that's probably it. So that's covering all the different lists today. So the 4 main lists, which would probably fall under like a mid-range style game plan, right? That's like the Barkskin list. You have the more proactive style game plans, mainly the Ice list, but technically like that Anothos list. And like that 3rd archetype of like hard control fatigue, like a blockout style version of Jarl. And they all have their individual strengths and some weaknesses. Overall, I think the hero is very cool, and I think it's a very interesting hero to try to build around and try to solve. I just don't think it's probably the right time for it. So I'm not really sure how much I'm going to continue to cover Jarl in the future on the channel. I would like to, because I think he's a really sick hero, but like personally, like I'm off playing the hero right now just because I don't really see a purpose competitively to play. Of course, if you just want to play him for fun, and that's like the enjoyment you get out of it, then by all means go for it. But until MST rotates, probably going to start covering him less and less. Maybe someone else can pick up the slack for me. But until next time, thank you for watching.